The training begins in the heart of the Galactic Empire's military academy. A group of young alien cadets stood in a vast, dimly lit hall. These cadets were part of the Empire's most prestigious training program, designed to mold the best soldiers in the universe. Across the galaxy, alien species trained to become warriors, but this group stood apart. Their training had been rigorous and unforgiving, and their minds were sharp, their bodies were strong, and their technology was advanced beyond anything the universe had seen. But despite all their advantages, they had never encountered anything like Earth. Today was a critical day for these cadets. It was their final assessment, a test that would determine their fate in the military. The room buzzed with nervous energy as they waited for their instructor to speak. The door at the front of the room slid open, and a tall alien walked in. He had the look of a seasoned veteran, his uniform dark and decorated with countless medals. His face was stern, but there was a flicker of something deeper in his eyes. The instructor was known for being harsh but fair, and his reputation had already struck fear into the cadets. He stood before them and spoke in a voice that echoed through the room. Today you will watch something unlike anything you've ever seen. It is a test of your understanding of warfare and survival. You will watch the footage of a species that many of you consider inferior Earthlings. You will witness their wars, their struggles, and their relentless drive to survive. The cadets exchanged confused glances, some of them chuckling under their breath. Earth was a planet many of them had never even considered a threat. Its inhabitants were primitive at best in their eyes. Their technology was far behind the advanced weaponry and machines that the Galactic Empire had. In fact, the idea of Earth's warriors being anything but weak was laughable to most of them. But there was something in the instructor's tone that made them uneasy. He gestured for the screen to turn on, and a massive holographic display flickered to life in front of them. The first image that appeared was a black and white photo of humans covered in mud standing in a trench. Their faces were grim, their eyes weary, and the air was thick with tension. The image then shifted to the chaos of battle, with explosions lighting up the sky and gunfire tearing through the air. The scene was of World War I, one of the most brutal conflicts in human history. As the cadets watched, the footage played on, showing the horrors of trench warfare, the relentless struggle between soldiers, and the harsh conditions they had to endure. The image shifted again, this time to footage from World War II. The cadets watched in stunned silence as bombs fell from the sky and entire cities were destroyed. They saw human soldiers charging into battle, their faces determined, their bodies bloodied and bruised. Some of the cadets laughed softly at first, sneering at the sight of human soldiers scrambling through the mud fighting with primitive weapons. It seemed almost comical to them. They had seen real technology, powerful weapons, capable of obliterating entire planets. How could these fragile humans ever stand a chance against the might of the Galactic Empire? But as the footage continued, the expressions on their faces began to change. The laughter began to die down. The carnage on the screen was like nothing they had ever seen before. Humans fighting not for glory or riches, but simply to survive. The footage shifted again, and this time it focused on a group of human soldiers trapped behind enemy lines. They were starving and wounded, but they fought on not for personal gain, but because they believed in their comrades, their cause, their survival. They fought through impossible conditions and refused to give up even as the enemy surrounded them. The cadets were silent, their eyes wide as they watched. They had expected to see weakness, to see humans retreating or begging for mercy, but instead they saw unwavering determination and courage. One of the cadets, named Zahn, was struggling to understand what she was seeing. She had been one of the top students in the academy and had always prided herself on her ability to think logically and strategically. But now, as she watched these humans fighting with nothing but their bare hands and rudimentary weapons, she felt a deep unease. How could they be so resilient? How could they keep fighting even when it seemed hopeless? She glanced around at her fellow cadets and saw that they were all equally troubled. One of them spoke up. How do they survive this? How do they keep going when everything is falling apart? The instructor spoke softly, his voice calm, but his words carried weight. That is the question, isn't it? What makes them keep fighting when all seems lost? What drives them to keep going when everything around them is telling them to stop? Zarn felt a chill run down her spine. She had never thought about warfare in this way. To her, battle had always been about tactics, technology, and numbers. But this footage was showing her something far more profound. Something she couldn't quite put into words. The instructor continued, "This is the spirit of humanity. Their ability to endure, to keep going when everything else is against them. It is a strength that no technology can replicate. No weapon can defeat their will to survive." The cadets sat in stunned silence. They had come into this training believing that they were the superior warriors, that nothing could stand against them. But now they were faced with a truth they hadn't expected to encounter. The humans on the screen were weak in terms of technology and resources, but they had something that the cadets didn't have. They had the will to fight, the will to survive. And that was a force far more powerful than anything the cadets had ever trained for. As the footage came to an end, the room was filled with an uncomfortable silence. The cadets had learned something that day, something that would stay with them for the rest of their lives. They had learned that humans were not the weak, primitive species they had believed them to be. They were survivors. And that was a lesson that would change everything. The first shock. The cadets sat in silence as the room's lights flickered back on, the harsh glow illuminating their uneasy faces. They were still processing what they had just witnessed. The instructor stood at the front of the room, his gaze sweeping over each cadet with a look that suggested he knew what was happening inside their minds. The footage of Earth's wars had left an indelible mark on them, but what was even more unsettling was how the humans seemed to find strength in the midst of hopelessness. It was a strength the cadets hadn't expected to see, and definitely hadn't anticipated. Feeling threatened by Zarn felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her chest. She had always been so sure of her species' superiority. They had technology that could reduce entire worlds to ashes in seconds. They had weaponry capable of obliterating anything in their path. Yet these humans, with their primitive tools and strategies, had managed to fight through things no one should ever have to endure. She looked around at her fellow cadets, and their faces mirrored her confusion and awe. "Does anyone else feel that?" Zarn's voice broke the silence. Her hands trembled slightly, a feeling she was not accustomed to. The other cadets exchanged uncertain glances, but none spoke. The instructor's voice cut through the tension, deep and unyielding. "You're not alone in your thoughts, cadets. What you're feeling is something I want you to understand. You've seen footage of the Battle of Stalingrad, the Battle of Normandy, and countless other human conflicts. But what you haven't seen yet is what truly defines their strength. You've seen survival, but you haven't seen the will to fight." The cadets shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Zarn, who had been the most confident of them all, now felt like she was questioning everything. They had been trained in the art of warfare for years, learning every trick in the book, every strategy and technique, but nothing in their training had prepared them for this raw, primal energy the humans seemed to possess. The instructor continued, "Today you will dig deeper. You will study not just their battles, but their tactics. You will understand that humans fought wars they could never win, and yet they kept fighting. They were often on the losing side, but they never gave up. And that is what makes them dangerous." Zarn's mind raced as she reflected on what the instructor had said. The battle footage was one thing, but what truly unsettled her was the fact that despite everything, the odds, the suffering, the loss, the humans never seemed to break. She had seen them bombed, starved, and surrounded by enemies, yet they held on. Her mind tried to rationalize it but kept coming up empty. Another cadet, Yuker, a tall alien with sharp features, suddenly spoke up. breaking the silence that had settled over the group. "I still don't understand. They had no advanced weapons. They fought with, what, guns and rifles? What made them keep going?" His tone was tinged with disbelief. The instructor's eyes narrowed as he turned to Yecker. "You think it's the weapons that make a soldier strong? You think it's the size of the army? No, cadet, it's the mind. It's the will. This is what you must learn. A human's weapon is his mind, and no amount of technology can defeat that. The will to survive, to fight even when death is certain. That is the strength of humanity. Their greatest weapon is their ability to adapt, to evolve, and to keep fighting when they should have given up long ago." Yecker fell silent. He had been sure that their superior weapons and strategies were enough to crush any threat, even a race like humanity. But now, as the instructor spoke, he wasn't so sure anymore. The other cadets were equally unsettled. They had trained for every scenario, prepared for every enemy, but they had never encountered a species with a will like the one they had just witnessed. The instructor gestured to the screen, which flickered again, this time showing a different set of images. "You are going to watch a few more battles. Study these carefully. Look at how the humans fight and think about how you would respond. Think about their mindsets, their willingness to sacrifice everything for what they believe in." The next clip showed footage from the Vietnam War. The images were grainy and raw, the intensity of the battles palpable even through the cold, metallic lens of the camera. Zarn's heart sank as she watched young human soldiers, no older than her own younger brother, crawl through dense jungles. They were malnourished, dirty, and exhausted, yet they fought on with a passion and desperation that was almost tangible. They faced overwhelming opposition, yet they pushed forward, knowing full well that victory was out of reach. The footage moved quickly, showing soldiers trapped behind enemy lines, hiding in the mud, taking fire from all sides. Yet they never stopped fighting. Zarn could feel the sweat on her brow as she watched the carnage unfold. She was used to combat, used to calculating outcomes, yet nothing about this made sense. These humans weren't just fighting for survival, they were fighting for something greater, something deeper. It wasn't about winning or losing. It was about resisting at all costs. As the clip ended, the room was eerily quiet. The cadets were shaken. The humans had shown them a side of warfare they had never seen before, a side that went beyond physical strength or advanced weaponry. It was the human spirit, an unrelenting force that refused to break no matter the odds. The instructor spoke once more, his voice almost somber. "You may think that you are invincible. You may believe that your technology and weaponry will carry you through any battle. But the humans showed you something that no weapon or machine can replicate. And that is something you must respect if you wish to call yourselves true warriors." Zarn felt a sense of unease creeping over her. She had always believed in the superiority of her species. She had always believed that technology would see them through. But now, as she reflected on the footage she had just witnessed, she began to understand something deeper. Perhaps it wasn't the weapons that made a warrior, it was the strength of the heart, the strength of the mind, and the refusal to give up when everything else was lost. As the lights dimmed and the cadets filed out of the room, Zarn felt a sense of quiet reverence. They had just been shown the greatest lesson of all, the one lesson that no amount of training or technology could have taught them. It was the lesson of the human spirit, the mysterious vibe. As the days passed and the cadets resumed their training, the weight of what they had seen began to settle deep within their minds. Zarn could not shake the feeling that something had shifted within her. She had always believed that warriors were made through strength training and superior tactics, but now she wasn't so sure. The humans she had seen in the footage didn't rely on brute force or advanced weaponry. They relied on something far more dangerous, something that could not be measured or defeated by any technology. It was their spirit, their will to keep fighting. Even when all seemed lost, This realization gnawed at her as she lay in her quarters one night staring up at the ceiling. What if her species wasn't as invincible as they thought? What if they were vulnerable in ways they hadn't even considered? Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock on her door. It was Yekker, one of the other cadets. His face was serious, his usual cocky demeanor replaced by something more subdued. "You awake?" he asked softly. Zarn nodded, sitting up in bed. "Yeah, what's going on?" "I can't stop thinking about what we saw the other day," Yekker said, his voice low. "It's like there's something about humans that we just don't understand. I've been trained to think that the strongest warriors are those with the most firepower and the best tactics. But what we saw was different." Zarn couldn't help but agree. She had always prided herself on her ability to assess a battle using logic and strategy. But what the humans had shown them didn't fit into any strategy she had ever learned. They fought without fear, they endured without hesitation, and they kept going even when there was no hope of victory. It was something she couldn't explain, and it troubled her deeply. "What if we've been wrong all this time?" Zarn asked softly. "What if the real strength isn't in our technology or our weapons? What if it's something else?" Yekker stared at her, his expression unreadable. "I don't know," he said after a long pause. "But it's like there's this vibe they have. A vibe we can't even begin to grasp. When I watch them fight, when I see their faces even in the middle of the worst situations, it's like they're not just fighting for survival. It's like they're fighting for something bigger than themselves, something that can't be measured." Zarn felt a chill run through her. Yekker was right. There was something about the humans that went beyond anything they had encountered before. It wasn't their weaponry, it wasn't their tactics, it was their relentless drive. They fought not because they wanted to win, but because they couldn't stop themselves from fighting. The will to survive, the will to stand up in the face of insurmountable odds, was their true weapon. As the days passed, the feeling that something was deeply unsettling continued to grow within Zarn. She could feel it in her bones like a strange current running beneath the surface of their training. She wasn't the only one affected. The entire group of cadets had changed since watching the footage. They had been the elite, the best of the best in their galaxy, but now they felt different. They no longer carried themselves with the same arrogance they once had. The way they looked at each other was different. The way they looked at their instructors was different. They were beginning to realize that they weren't as invincible as they had believed. In the following days, the cadets were given new assignments. They were told to study the human wars even more deeply, this time focusing on the humans' ability to adapt. They were shown footage of human soldiers in the desert, struggling against overwhelming forces, armed only with their wits and whatever they could find. The footage showed these soldiers hiding behind rocks, constructing makeshift weapons from whatever they could scavenge. It was an image that was hard to forget. Zarn watched in awe as these humans seemed to turn the environment against their enemies, using nothing but their ingenuity. There was no advanced technology, no powerful weapons, just the will to survive and adapt. As the footage played on, Zarn felt a growing sense of unease. She had seen the humans fight in the trenches, fight in the cities, and now she was watching them fight in the desert. No matter the environment, no matter the enemy, they always found a way to fight. It wasn't just about tactics, it wasn't just about strength. It was about the human mind. It was about the ability to adapt and keep going, even when all the odds were stacked against them. Zarn leaned forward in her seat, her eyes fixed on the screen. There was a moment in the footage when one of the human soldiers was pinned down under heavy fire. His comrades had been killed, and he was left alone. He could have surrendered, he could have run away, but instead he did something that stunned Zarn. He used the rocks around him to create a trap for his enemies. It wasn't a perfect plan, it wasn't even a well-constructed trap, but it was enough to turn the tide. Zarn felt a lump in her throat as she watched the human soldier stand tall, even as the situation grew more desperate. He didn't give up. He didn't retreat. He fought and adapted because that was what humans did. When the footage ended, there was a heavy silence in the room. The cadets were visibly shaken. They had seen what the humans could do, and it wasn't something they could ignore. The instructor stepped forward and spoke in a tone that was unusually serious. What you've seen today is not just about fighting. It's about surviving. You've watched how humans adapt, how use what they have at their disposal to win battles they should never have won. Their strength lies in their minds, their creativity, their ability to survive. This is what you must learn. You can never underestimate this force. It is their greatest weapon and their most dangerous trait. Zarn's mind raced as the instructor's words echoed in her ears. She could feel the tension in the air as her fellow cadets tried to process what they had seen. They had come into this training believing that their technology and weapons would make them unstoppable, but now they were faced with the truth. The humans didn't need advanced technology to survive. They needed their minds, their ingenuity, their refusal to give up. And that was something that no amount of advanced technology could ever defeat. Zarn knew that they had underestimated humanity, and she wasn't sure if they would ever fully understand just how powerful the human spirit really was. The turning point the following days felt like an eternity to the cadets. Each new assignment, each new piece of footage, dug deeper into the core of their understanding of humanity and themselves. Zarn could not escape the thoughts swirling in her mind. Every night as she lay in her quarters, the images of the human soldiers clinging to life, their refusal to give up, echoed in her thoughts. What made them so different from every other species they had encountered? What made them fight, not just for survival, but for something more? The question gnawed at her every waking moment. One evening as the cadets gathered for their next session, Zarn could see the unease on everyone's face. The instructor was not there yet, but the air was thick with the same tension that had hung over them since they watched the last set of battle footage. Zarn sat quietly staring at the floor, her thoughts consumed by the questions she couldn't answer. It wasn't just the human soldiers, it was the sheer tenacity with which they fought. They didn't fight like warriors, they fought like survivors desperate to protect something, even if that something was nothing more than their own existence. They fought because they had no choice. And it was that relentless spirit that seemed impossible to defeat. Yecker sat next to her, his usual cocky attitude gone. He leaned forward in his seat, his face hard with concentration. "Do you think we could have survived what they went through?" he asked, his voice low. Zarn shook her head. "I don't know. The more I watch, the more I wonder if we ever could." The instructor entered the room, his expression unreadable as always. He said nothing as he activated the screen. The familiar silence filled the room as the footage began to play. This time it was different. The footage showed humans during the Korean War, their faces exhausted, their bodies barely able to move as they fought against overwhelming odds. Zarn could see the desperation in their eyes as they fought tooth and nail to survive, each battle pushing further into enemy territory. Despite their injuries and exhaustion, as the footage progressed, Zarn's stomach twisted. There was something primal in the way these soldiers fought. It wasn't just about winning, it was about survival. No matter how many times they were knocked down, they stood back up and kept fighting. Zarn could feel a strange sensation in the pit of her stomach. She couldn't explain it, but it was as if the very essence of what it meant to survive was there, in those human faces, in the way they endured through unimaginable suffering. Then came a moment that shocked Zarn to her core. A soldier, a young human, barely more than a boy, was captured by enemy forces. Zarn watched as the human was interrogated, beaten, and left for dead. Yet he never gave in. His eyes remained defiant even as the enemy tried to break him. He didn't beg for mercy, he didn't plead for his life. He simply refused to surrender. His spirit was unbroken. Zarn couldn't tear her eyes away from the screen. The human's face was bloodied, his body bruised, but his will was stronger than any weapon the cadets had ever encountered. How could anyone endure that much pain and still refuse to submit? What kind of strength did they possess? The footage shifted and showed the soldier managing to escape his captors. With nothing but the clothes on his back and the will to survive, he fought his way out of enemy territory. Zarn had seen many battles in her training, many warriors who fought with strategy and skill, but she had never seen anyone fight like this. It was raw, it was brutal, and it was unstoppable. It was something that couldn't be replicated no matter how much technology or power was on their side. The room was silent as the footage ended. Zarn felt the weight of what she had just witnessed pressing down on her chest. She wasn't the only one who felt it. The other cadets sat frozen in their seats, their faces pale, their eyes wide with disbelief. The instructor waited for them to process the footage, letting the silence hang in the air. Finally he spoke, his voice steady but filled with an undeniable gravity. You've just seen something that you cannot ignore. The human spirit is not easily broken. Their survival is not just about weapons or tactics. It is about something much deeper, something that no amount of technology or training can replicate. You've seen a human soldier endure unimaginable suffering without breaking. And that is something no amount of firepower can defeat. Zarn's mind raced. She had always believed in the power of technology and the superiority of her species' advancements. But now she was starting to see the flaw in that belief. The humans didn't rely on machines, they didn't rely on strength in the traditional sense. They relied on something more profound, something that had kept them alive through the worst atrocities in history. They had an unyielding will to survive, to keep going, even when everything around them screamed for them to stop. Zarn felt a deep sense of respect for these humans growing within her. They had fought wars, they had no chance of winning, yet they still fought because they couldn't imagine anything else. And now the cadets were left to ask themselves a question that none of them had ever considered. What would happen if they faced a battle where their technology and power didn't guarantee victory? What if they were forced to fight not with weapons, but with sheer willpower and determination? Could they survive like the humans did? The instructor's voice broke through her thoughts. Today you've learned something vital. You've learned that in the heart of every warrior lies the will to survive. It is not enough to be powerful, it is not enough to be skilled. To truly be a warrior, you must have the spirit to endure. The humans showed you that. As the class ended, the cadets filed out of the room silently. They had been changed forever by what they had witnessed. Zarn felt the same unease growing within her, but now it was accompanied by something else: respect. She had seen something in the humans that she had never expected to see. It was a strength beyond anything they could measure, a strength that no weapon could counter. And that strength made them formidable in ways she had never imagined. As the cadets returned to their quarters that night, Zarn knew one thing for certain. The humans were not the weaklings they had believed them to be. They were something much more dangerous, something that could not be conquered by technology or firepower. They were survivors in every sense of the word, and that made them a force to be reckoned with. The emotional realization, the days following their latest assignment, felt different for the cadets. They no longer carried the same confidence that had once come so naturally to them. Zarn could see it in their eyes when they passed each other in the halls. There was a quiet unease now, something unspoken, hanging in the air between them. The training had always been difficult, but now it felt like there was something more at stake. They weren't just learning strategies and tactics anymore. They were grappling with something far deeper, something that challenged everything they had been taught. Zarn spent her nights in restless thought. Her mind kept returning to the human soldiers she had seen on the screen. The way they fought, not for glory or fame, but simply to survive. How could they do that? How could they fight through so much pain and destruction without surrendering? It was something that couldn't be replicated by mere technology or training. It was something intrinsic, something in the very heart of their species. She had always prided herself on being strong and resilient. She had endured the most grueling training sessions, faced the most difficult challenges, and never once wavered. But now she found herself questioning whether she could endure what those humans had endured. Could she stand firm in the face of such overwhelming adversity? Could she keep fighting when everything seemed hopeless? The thought disturbed her more than she cared to admit. One evening, as the cadets gathered for their next session, the instructor walked in as usual, but there was something different in his demeanor. He seemed more serious, more somber than before. His eyes scanned the room as he took his place at the front and began speaking. "Today, we are going to discuss something you've all been avoiding," the instructor said, his voice calm but heavy. "You've seen the footage of human warriors in battle. You've seen them fight and survive against all odds. But there's something you haven't fully understood yet. It's time you learned what it truly means to be a warrior. To truly understand the strength of the human spirit, you must first understand the cost of that strength." The cadets exchanged uneasy glances, but none spoke. Zarn's heart began to race. She could feel the tension building in the room as the instructor continued. "When you watched those human soldiers endure unimaginable pain and suffering, you saw only the surface. You saw their strength, their resilience, but what you didn't see was the price they paid to get there. You didn't see the trauma, the grief, the emotional scars they carry with them long after the battle ends. Every warrior has a price, and humans are no exception. Their strength comes at a cost, and that cost is not just physical. It is mental and emotional. They carry the weight of their battles with them every day. They live with the memories of their fallen comrades, the weight of their actions, the loss of their innocence." Zarn felt a knot form in her stomach. She had never considered the emotional toll of warfare. She had always viewed battles as tactical challenges, tests of strength and strategy. But what the instructor was saying was different. The human soldiers didn't just fight for victory. They fought for something more complex, something that couldn't be understood by mere tactics or technology. They fought for survival, but also for the memory of those they had lost along the way. The instructor's voice softened as he continued. "You see, cadets' humanity's strength is not just in their ability to endure physical pain. It is in their ability to keep going despite the emotional scars they carry. Every battle, every war leaves a mark on their souls. And yet they continue to fight. That is the true strength of humanity." The room was silent as the cadets absorbed his words. Zarn felt a wave of emotions flood over her. She had never thought about war this way. She had always seen it as a means to an end, a challenge to be overcome through strength and tactics. But now she was beginning to understand that the true battle was not just fought on the battlefield. It was fought in the heart and mind of every soldier who lived through it. Zarn's thoughts were interrupted by a voice. It was Yeker's voice, his tone strained. "Are you saying that humans fight because they can't forget the past? That they carry the weight of every battle with them, even when the fight is over?" Yeker asked. The instructor nodded slowly. "Yes, cadet. That is exactly what I'm saying. Humanity does not fight just for survival. They fight because they cannot let go of the memories of their fallen comrades. They fight because the past never truly leaves them. And it is that burden that makes them stronger than any weapon or tactic could ever make them." Zarn sat back in her chair as the weight of the instructor's words sank in. The humans didn't just fight for themselves. They fought for the people they had lost, for the memories they carried with them. Every battle, every war was a reminder of what they had sacrificed and what they stood to lose. And yet they kept fighting. They didn't give up even when the pain was too much to bear. It was a strength that no one had prepared her to understand. She glanced around at her fellow cadets. Their faces were pale, their eyes wide with disbelief. They had always believed in their superiority, their advanced technology, their unshakable training. But now they were confronted with a truth they had never considered. The humans were not just warriors. They were survivors. Survivors of not just battle, but of the emotional trauma that came with it. Zarn felt a surge of respect for humanity that she hadn't felt before. She had seen their strength in battle, their ability to survive the most brutal wars, but now she saw something deeper. She saw their resilience, their ability to carry the weight of their losses and keep moving forward. It was a strength that no weapon could replicate, no matter how advanced it was. And that realization made her see the humans in a new light. The instructor's final words echoed in the room. Cadets, what you must learn is that strength is not just about physical power or advanced technology. It is about the courage to face your fears, your trauma, and your past. It is about the will to keep going even when everything seems lost. That is what makes humanity so dangerous. And that is what you must respect if you ever wish to defeat them. Zarn sat in silence as the session ended. She had come to this training believing that her species was the strongest in the galaxy. But now she wasn't so sure. The humans had shown her a strength that no amount of firepower or tactics could match. They had shown her what it meant to fight, not just for survival, but for something deeper, for the memories of those they had lost. And that was something that could not be measured by any weapon or technology. As she left the room, Zarn knew that she had learned something that would stay with her forever. Humanity was not just a threat to be defeated. They were a force to be reckoned with. And that force came not from their technology or their weapons, but from their hearts. The challenge, the days that followed, felt like a constant, unyielding weight pressing down on the cadets. Every time they woke, the words of the instructor echoed in their minds. Humanity's strength, not in their technology, not in their weapons, but in their unbreakable spirit. Zarn couldn't escape the realization that their training, their understanding of warfare, had been too narrow, too focused on power rather than resilience. How could they ever be sure of their victory when facing an enemy who fought not just with their hands but with their hearts? The thought lingered in the back of her mind, unsettling and deep, growing as she considered the implications of everything they had seen. The cadets were given new assignments, but this time there was something different in the air. The tension among them was palpable. It wasn't just the uncertainty of what they would face next. It was the question of whether their training was enough to stand against humanity's will. Every mission they had been given up to this point had seemed like a logical step, a challenge to be completed with precision and calculation. But now, even the simplest assignment seemed to carry weight. Every decision felt loaded. Every move questioned. Zarn sat in the briefing room, her eyes flicking to the other cadets. Yekker was unusually quiet, his gaze distant as he stared at the floor. The rest of the group looked much the same, their faces drawn, their minds clearly elsewhere. Zarn could feel the shift in herself too. Her usual confidence, once so steady and reliable, had cracked, leaving a layer of doubt in its place. It wasn't just fear of failure. It was the fear that no matter how much they trained, no matter how much they adapted, they might never be able to understand or replicate what made humanity so dangerous. The instructor entered the room as usual, his presence as commanding as ever. But there was something different in his manner today, something almost deliberate. He surveyed the cadets, taking his time before speaking. When he did, his voice was low, cutting through the silence. You've all been taught that strength comes from control, from precision, from technology. You've seen the footage. You've heard my words. But now you must prove yourselves. You will face a challenge that no amount of tactics can prepare you for. You will face a situation that will test your resolve in ways you cannot predict. And it will be unlike anything you have ever faced before. You will not be fighting with weapons or machines. You will not be relying on your advanced technology. You will be tested on something far more difficult, your will to survive. The words struck the cadets like a hammer. Zarn felt the blood drain from her face as she processed what the instructor was saying. They had always believed that their superiority lay in their technology, in their advanced weaponry, in their ability to plan and execute flawlessly. But now they were being told that none of that mattered. The human strength wasn't in their weapons or their machines. It was in their sheer ability to endure. And now they were going to face something that would test that endurance. The instructor turned, activating a holographic display that began to show a series of images, each one more unsettling than the last. The images were not of battles or wars, but of human survival against natural disasters. There were humans stranded in deserts, fighting for water, struggling against the scorching heat and the crushing isolation. There were images of humans caught in floods, clinging to debris as their homes and families were swept away. There were humans trapped in collapsed buildings after earthquakes, struggling to find a way out with nothing but their wits and sheer willpower. Zarn's breath caught in her throat as she watched the footage unfold. These weren't the battles they had seen before, where humans fought against other enemies. These were not soldiers facing a war. These were ordinary people, fighting against the forces of nature itself, with nothing but their drive to survive. Zarn watched in silence as one image stood out to her, a mother carrying her child through the ruins of a collapsed city. Her face battered and exhausted, yet her eyes held a spark of determination, a spark that refused to die. The challenge you face will be unlike any other. The instructor's voice broke through her thoughts. You will be placed in an environment where survival is the only objective. You will have to rely on yourselves, on your strength of mind and spirit. You will not have the luxury of advanced technology, and there will be no easy answers. You will face a situation where every step you take could mean the difference between life and death. And you will not have the luxury of turning back. You will face what humanity faces every day, the fight to survive. The room grew tense as the cadets processed the challenge ahead. Zarn could feel her pulse quickening. This was it. The moment they had been prepared for in every way but one. They had trained to be the best, to defeat enemies in battle, to crush their opponents with superior force and precision. But this challenge would ask something different of them. It would ask them to endure. Zarn was the first to speak, her voice steady but her heart racing. What do you expect from us? We're soldiers. We don't know how to survive without technology. We don't know how to endure like humans do. The instructor's eyes locked with hers, his gaze intense. Then it's time you learned. Your technology will not save you. Your weapons will not save you. You will have to find a way to survive with nothing but your will. And if you fail, you will be left with the knowledge that you were not strong enough, not resilient enough to survive. But if you succeed, you will have learned the true meaning of strength. Zarn could feel her hands tightening into fists. The challenge was clear now. They were about to face a test that would strip away everything they relied on, everything they had ever known. And they would have to rely on something they didn't even understand yet. But there was something else in the air now, a sense of determination, a sense of resolve. She could feel it in her fellow cadets. They had been given a task that no amount of training had prepared them for, but now they understood something fundamental. To be a true warrior, it wasn't enough. To fight, it was about surviving, about enduring. And that would be the true test. As the instructor concluded the session, the cadets slowly filed out of the room, each of them deep in thought. Zarn couldn't help but feel a strange sense of calm settling over her. They were about to face something unimaginable, but in a way, that was what they had been trained for, to survive, to adapt, to endure. And maybe, just maybe, that was the lesson they needed to learn. The decision, the final day of their challenge had arrived. Zarn stood before her fellow cadets, her heart heavy with a mixture of anticipation and dread. The instructor had said they would be tested on their ability to survive, but this was more than just survival. It was a test of everything they had learned over the past weeks, everything they had thought they knew about what it meant to be strong. They had been stripped of their technology, their weapons, and now, all they had left was their will, their minds, and their ability to endure the unthinkable. The instructor had led them to a remote, desolate area, a harsh environment where no alien technology had any influence. It was a barren stretch of land, void of resources and shelter, a place where only the strongest survived. The sun blazed down mercilessly, its heat oppressive and unforgiving. The wind howled, carrying with it the dust and sand of a dry, unforgiving desert. For the first time, Zarn felt a pang of uncertainty. She had always known that the desert was a harsh environment, but standing here now, with no plan, no technology to fall back on, it felt like an entirely different world. The cadets were given no map, no instructions, no clear direction. They were simply told to survive. They would be left here for 3 days with nothing but the clothes on their backs and their instincts. There would be no outside help, no reinforcements, no guidance. Just them and the unforgiving landscape. It was as close to a real battle as they would ever face, where survival itself would be the ultimate challenge. Zarn turned to face the other cadets, each one of them wearing the same expression, a mixture of determination and fear. They had been trained for every type of combat imaginable, but none of it had prepared them for this. They had been taught to fight with weapons, to fight with strategies, but now they were being asked to fight with something else, something they hadn't even known they had. Something that came from within. Yecker was the first to speak, his voice low and strained. "This is insane. How are we supposed to survive this? We have nothing, no technology, no weapons. We're just out here." He gestured around at the endless stretch of desert. Zarn felt the same doubt rising within her, but she quickly forced it down. They had come this far. They had watched humans fight and survive with nothing but their willpower, their determination. And now, they would have to do the same. It didn't matter that they didn't have their technology. It didn't matter that they didn't have their weapons. What mattered now was how far they could push themselves to endure. "Focus," Zarn said, her voice steady. "We've trained for moments like this. We've learned to adapt. We may not have what we're used to, but we have something more powerful. Our minds, our spirits, we can do this." The other cadets nodded, but there was still a flicker of doubt in their eyes. Zarn could see it. They weren't convinced yet. But she could feel the weight of her own words and knew she had to keep them moving forward. The challenge had begun. They began walking into the harsh desert, the sun beating down relentlessly, the ground beneath them dry and cracked. Every step felt like a test, every moment like a challenge they had never faced before. There were no clear paths, no signs of civilization. Just endless sand and the oppressive heat. The weight of it pressed down on them, draining their energy, making every step feel like it was dragging them further into an abyss. As the hours wore on, fatigue began to set in. Their water supplies were minimal, and the landscape offered no relief from the heat. Zarn could feel her skin burning, her throat dry, but she kept pushing forward, telling herself that this was what they had trained for. This was their test, their challenge. If humans could survive in these conditions, then so could they. The first night in the desert was the hardest. There was no shelter to protect them from the cold that came with the desert night. No place to rest except the hard ground beneath them. They sat in silence, their bodies aching from the day's exertions, their minds spinning with the enormity of what they were facing. Yecker sat next to Zarn, his face drawn and weary. "I don't know how they do it," he said quietly. "The humans. I mean, how do they keep going, even when there's no hope left?" Zarn looked at him, her eyes hard and focused. "It's because they don't stop, they don't give up. When they fight, it's not just for themselves. It's for everyone who depends on them. It's for the people they've lost. They have something that keeps them going, even when everything is against them. And that's something we need to learn from them." Yecker didn't reply, but Zarn could see that he was processing her words. There was a shift in him, a recognition of the truth that was slowly dawning on all of them. They were not here just to endure the desert. They were here to learn the value of endurance itself, to understand that survival was not just about physical strength. It was about the will to keep going, to stand tall in the face of the impossible, and to never back down. The next day, as the sun rose again, the cadets set off once more, their bodies sore, their spirits exhausted, but their minds beginning to sharpen. They had learned something the day before. This wasn't just about surviving. It was about enduring. And they could endure. By the end of the third day, the cadets were near the brink of exhaustion, their energy drained, their bodies broken, but their resolve stronger than ever. Zarn looked at her fellow cadets, and for the first time, she saw something different in their eyes. They were no longer uncertain. They were no longer afraid. They had endured. And in enduring, they had found something far more powerful than they had ever imagined. When the instructor arrived to collect them, he found the cadets sitting in the sand, their faces tired but resolute. He said nothing as they made their way back to the transport, but his eyes gleamed with approval. The cadets had faced the ultimate test, and they had learned the most important lesson of all. Strength wasn't just about weapons or technology. It was about the will to survive, to keep going when everything seemed lost, and to fight not just for themselves, but for something greater. Zarn felt a sense of pride swelling within her as she looked at her fellow cadets. They had survived. They had proven themselves, and they had finally understood what it meant to be a true warrior. They had learned the strength of the human spirit, and in doing so, they had unlocked the strength of their own. As they left the desert behind, Zarn knew that they would never be the same again. They had faced the darkness, and they had emerged stronger. They had learned to endure, to adapt, and to fight not just with their strength, but with their hearts. And that was a power no one, not even the mightiest empire, could ever defeat. The sun had set, and the desert was quiet now, the wind a gentle whisper across the sands. Zarn stood on the edge of the barren landscape, her eyes scanning the horizon. The past few days had felt like a lifetime, but they had changed everything for her. Her entire understanding of strength had shifted. The cadets had come to this place believing that victory was always within reach if they had the right tools, the right weapons, but now they understood that victory wasn't just about winning battles or outsmarting an enemy. It was about the will to keep fighting when every instinct told you to stop. She could feel the weight of everything they had learned pressing down on her, but it didn't feel like a burden. It felt like freedom. The strength they had been trained to rely on, the technology, the strategies, the perfect plans had all been stripped away, and in its place, they had found something far more powerful. They had found the resilience that came from within, the part of themselves that refused to surrender no matter how impossible the odds. As Zarn stood there, she could see the other cadets in the distance, their faces no longer filled with doubt, but with something else, something that spoke of growth and transformation. They had learned the hardest lesson of all. It wasn't enough to simply be strong. You had to be willing to endure, to face the pain and the fear, and still keep moving forward. They had watched humanity fight through wars and disasters with nothing but their sheer will, and they had come to understand what made them so formidable. The human spirit was something that couldn't be measured with weapons or technology. It was something that lived deep within each person, a force that could never be defeated by any external force. As the cadets gathered together, for the final time, Zarn looked around at her comrades. Their expressions had changed. There was no longer any uncertainty or fear. They had faced their challenges and emerged stronger for it. They were no longer just soldiers trained to fight with precision and power. They were warriors who understood what it meant to survive, to endure when everything seemed lost. The instructor stood before them, his gaze steady as ever, but now there was a hint of approval in his eyes. "You've learned what you needed to learn," he said, his voice calm but filled with authority. "You've seen what it means to fight, not just with strength, but with spirit. What you have experienced here cannot be taught with training or tactics. It is something you must discover for yourselves. You are no longer just cadets, you are warriors. Zarn's heart swelled with pride as she stood there alongside her fellow cadets. They had faced the hardest trial of their lives, and they had come through it stronger, more united than they had ever been. They had learned to fight not just with their bodies or their minds, but with something deeper, with the part of them that would never stop fighting no matter what. Instructor turned and began to walk away without another word. The cadets followed him silently, each of them reflecting on the journey they had just completed. They had come into this training believing that strength was something that could be quantified, something that could be measured by the weapons you carried or the technology you controlled. But now they understood that true strength was something far more profound. It was the strength to stand up after every fall, to keep fighting when all hope seemed lost, to endure when the world itself seemed to be collapsing around you. As Zarn walked alongside her comrades, she felt a sense of calm wash over her. She no longer feared the challenges ahead. She knew that no matter what came their way, they would be ready. They had learned the most important lesson of all, the lesson that no weapon could ever match the power of the human spirit. And that was a lesson that would stay with them for the rest of their lives. The journey was over for now, but the truth they had discovered would never leave them. They had faced the darkness and come out stronger. And in the end, that was what made them truly formidable. The strength to survive, the strength to endure, the strength to never give up no matter what. The end.